2020, the year I thought would never come. I always saw it as a mythical point far off in the distant future, by which I would have either gotten my life all figured out, or gathered up enough guts to end myself. Having done neither, I find myself now redefining emotionally the meaning of this arbitrary point in the persistent succession of days. I feel as if being pushed through curtains onto a stage, being required to perform, not yet feeling ready despite many failed rehearsals. A snapshot of that blinded moment, unable to behold what you are about to experience, completely overwhelmed by the vein-tickling rush of the unknown. The 2010s, though, were quite a decade. So much has happened, both good and bad. 2010 was the first time I made New Year's resolutions. A few years after my first tasting of the more challenging side of real life, I had decided I was not happy with the turn my childhood had taken. I took my unrealistic expectations of life fueled by Disney Channel shows and decided if I'm going to continue putting up with this whole life thing, I'm going to do so on my terms. My 14-year-old self fantasized about every possible situation I might enjoy. My simple-minded young self wanted all the cliches, many friends, a girlfriend, my own computer with all the video games, and rebellious adventure of more forbidden things. And I wanted it all by 2020. These goals at the time felt like the biggest ask in the world, borderline unachievable, yet now they seem so silly, small, trivial. Likewise, for this next decade, I have set goals that seem ridiculously far beyond my reach, and I can only hope that by 2030 they will seem just as trivial and insignificant when compared to what is accomplished in this next chapter. The world will be a very different place by 2030, so much so that at this point 2030 is terrifying to even think of. This progress, however, will only happen via keeping an eye on these North Stars, to avoid straying, to continue trudging on. Unlike this last decade, where I took a long time before actually beginning at all to attempt this unwritten bucket list of sorts. After making these first resolutions, it was a year and a half before leaving online school in favor of more socializing, but then I was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of people and noise in a physical school, and remained the shy kid. From there, it took another year and a half to finally decide I wanted to go back to making YouTube videos, and despite several attempts, it took me 6 more years to get serious enough about it to stick with it against my own odds. I lost myself entirely for several years in the middle of the decade, and spent a couple years afterwards emotionally disconnected, working my ass off to make up monetarily for lost time. I think the number one thing I've learned through all of this, I wish I'd learned sooner, would be that life is lived, not thought. You can imagine something in your head all you want and go over every possible hurdle and outcome to determine how you'd act in each situation, but that doesn't make you an expert on said thing. You have to actually do it, and when you do, you'll encounter things you never could have imagined because you'd yet to have learned of them. Do first. Think second, then do better from the self-analysis. The most important thing I've gained over this last decade was self-awareness, and I can only imagine where I'd be now if I actually put in effort these past 10 years and refused to do anything other than strive for my highest goals as much as I'd wanted to. I don't know exactly what the point of this video is other than expressing thoughts and feelings about this milestone in history. Perhaps it is art in its own right and doesn't need to be justified or put into a context with a purpose. Or maybe it's just a scream into the void, hoping for at the very least a simple, "Hey, I feel that too." I am certain though that others feel similarly, so I don't know. I recently came upon the question, if you woke up January 1st, 2020, and the first thing you saw was a button labeled "Press to redo the 2010s, would you press it?" Assuming I would keep my mind and life experience, I would press it immediately without hesitation. I also lately have found myself rediscovering YouTube videos and songs that I haven't seen or heard since I first discovered them approximately 10 years ago. These things affected me and defined me more than I realized, in a good way. I wonder if the feeling I have looking back on those videos now will be the same feeling I get 10 years from now looking back on what I'm making and watching now, or was that truly a once-in-a-lifetime chapter? But that's more than enough talk of the past. What can we take from all this moving forward? Your future self is looking back on you all the time. Make them proud. Do what it takes to give them the life you wish you had. At the end of the day, all I can dream for and strive for is learning from mistakes, both our own and those of others, so as to live in a state of pleasant progress towards responsibility and sustainability. Here's to the Roaring 20s, Round 2. I hope you all too find within yourself the strength, courage, and resolve to live life to the fullest, whatever that means to you, and that we may all learn responsibility to clean up after ourselves so as to not inhibit others' abilities to do the same. Cheers to day one of the next chapter.